Every now and then, a single act of kindness shatters the silence of a lifetime. When a lonely Apache man stumbled upon a young girl tied to a tree on the edge of the wild, he could never have imagined how that moment would change everything, not just for her, but for himself and the entire valley. What followed would leave everyone who heard their story speechless, and remind even the hardest hearts that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected hands. The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs of the Arizona desert, painting the world in streaks of fire and shadow. In that hour between day and night, when the coyotes begin to cry and the wind stirs secrets from the sagebrush, Nacho rode his old paint pony along the narrow game trail, lost in thought. For years, Nacho had lived alone, his people gone or scattered, his family claimed by war and hunger, the small camp by the river kept only for himself and his aging horse. He spoke little, trusted less, and carried the weight of old grief like a stone in his chest. The world around him was empty, but for the whispers of the wind and the hush of wild things. He rode this trail at dusk every evening, checking his traps and watching for signs of the mountain lion that had been stalking his camp. He preferred the silence, the space to remember the faces he'd lost, and the comfort of knowing no one expected anything from him. But on this night, as he rounded a bend thick with juniper and mesquite, a sharp, unnatural cry pierced the twilight, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't animal or wind, but human, small, afraid. Nacho reined in his horse, heart pounding, every sense on alert. He dismounted quietly, drawing his knife from his belt, and moved through the brush, his footsteps silent as shadow. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the fading light, some animal caught in a snare or a lost child from a distant ranch. But as he drew closer, the truth revealed itself with chilling clarity. A girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, tied by her wrists to the trunk of a twisted cottonwood. Her hair was matted, her dress torn and stained, her feet bare and bleeding in the dust. She wasn't crying now, only staring with wide, dark eyes that met his without flinching. There was no one else around, no tracks but hers and whoever had left her here. Nacho's chest tightened as memories he'd buried long ago clawed their way back, memories of hunger and exile, of seeing children abandoned when there was not enough to go around. But this was different. This child had been left here not by famine, but by someone's hand, someone who wanted her gone. He knelt before her, knife glinting in the last light, and spoke gently in the soft Apache he hadn't used in years. "Are you hurt?" The girl didn't answer, but her gaze didn't waver. Her lips trembled, as if she was trying to remember how to trust. Nacho cut the ropes from her wrists, the fibers rough and tight, leaving angry marks on her skin. She swayed, nearly collapsing, but he caught her and held her upright, his grip firm but gentle. As he lifted her into his arms, she didn't resist, only whispered, voice raw and uncertain, "Please, don't take me back." Nacho shook his head, silent promise in his eyes. He would never return a child to such cruelty. He wrapped her in his blanket, hoisted her onto his horse, and began the long ride back to his camp. With every step, the world seemed to change around him, old walls crumbling, new hope flickering in the darkness. He did not yet know who she was or why she had been left for dead, but he knew one thing with certainty: he would protect her, no matter the cost. By the time they reached the river's edge, the sky was black and full of stars. And somewhere, in the quiet between heartbeats, 2 lives forever marked by loneliness began to turn towards something neither had ever known: the promise of belonging. The air around the small camp by the river was thick with the mingled scents of smoke and sage, dust and water. Nacho moved with quiet efficiency, building the fire higher than usual and setting a pot of beans to simmer while he wrapped the girl's hands in clean strips of linen torn from his only spare shirt. She watched him with the wary focus of a wild animal, ready to bolt at any sudden movement, but too exhausted to do more than sit by the warmth of the flames. Nacho didn't press her with questions. He knew from a lifetime of silence that sometimes words only made wounds deeper. Instead, he offered her small comforts: a tin cup of water, a chunk of cornbread, the warmth of his old blanket draped across her thin shoulders. For a while, she didn't eat or drink, only clutched the cup with both hands, staring at her own reflection trembling on the water's surface. Night settled over the river, the chorus of frogs and crickets filling the darkness. Nacha busied himself tending the horse and checking his traps, always keeping the fire within sight. When he returned, he found the girl curled up on the blanket, eyes still open, flinching at every distant coyote howl. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice so soft he almost missed it. "Why did you help me?" Nacha paused, unsure how to answer. He sat beside her, careful not to come too close, and after a moment said simply, "Because no one else did." He saw her jaw tighten, a flash of disbelief in her eyes, but she didn't respond. He tried again. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Mika." He nodded once. "I'm Nacha. You're safe here. No one will hurt you tonight." At that, her shoulders seemed to sag with relief, but her gaze never left him. Nacha recognized that look. He had worn it himself years ago, when trust felt like a trap and hope only led to disappointment. As the night wore on, Mika fell into a restless sleep, tossing beneath the blanket, mumbling words he couldn't understand. Nacha sat beside her, feeding the fire and listening to her dreams. He noticed bruises on her wrists, dried blood along her scalp, and a split lip half hidden by her tangled hair. Fury simmered beneath his calm exterior, but he kept his voice gentle when she stirred awake, shivering. The next morning, the world was bright and cold. The river ran high from recent rains, and birds darted between the reeds. Nacha made breakfast, eggs, a heel of bread, a sliver of salt pork, and set the plate beside Mika as she sat up, blinking in the sunlight. She ate this time, slowly at first, then hungrily, as if afraid the food might disappear. When she finished, Nacha knelt nearby and asked, "Do you remember how you got there?" Mika's lips pressed into a thin line. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, in a halting voice, she admitted, "My uncle. He said I was trouble. He said I brought bad luck, so they tied me up, left me." The words hung between them, heavier than stone. Nacha's jaw clenched. He understood too well the cruel logic of those who needed a scapegoat. He reached out but stopped short, not wanting to frighten her. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. Mika's eyes glistened, but she refused to cry. "I'm not going back," she insisted. "Ever." "You won't," Nacha promised, his voice solid as the ground beneath them. Over the next few days, a fragile routine settled into place. Nacha showed Mika how to collect water from the river, how to twist willow bark into cord, how to spot coyote tracks and read the signs of approaching rain. At first, Mika barely spoke, but she watched his every move, absorbing each lesson with silent determination. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she'd touch the raw skin around her wrists, wincing at the memory. Other times, Nacha caught her staring into the flames, as if seeing ghosts in the embers. He let her have those silences, never pressing, never questioning, just sitting nearby as the river sang its slow song. One afternoon, Nacha left her in camp while he went to check the traps downstream. He wasn't gone long, but when he returned, he found Mika on her feet, clutching a stick like a weapon, her body rigid with fear. A coyote had wandered too close to camp, drawn by the scent of food, but Mika had faced it down, shouting and waving until the animal slunk away. Nacha smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "You're brave," he told her as he knelt beside the fire, and for the first time, Mika smiled back. A small, crooked thing, but real. As the days passed, Nacha began to notice other changes. Mika's cheeks grew rounder, color returning to her face. Her steps grew more confident, her eyes brighter. She began to hum quietly as she worked, braiding grass or sorting pebbles by the river. Each evening, she inched a little closer to the fire, to him. But safety is always temporary in the wild. One morning, as Nacha returned from gathering wood, he spotted hoofprints near the riverbank, fresh and deep, too large for his pony. His heart hammered. Someone had come close to the camp. Someone looking for something. Or someone. He glanced at Mika, her small frame crouched by the water, unaware of the new danger lurking just beyond the trees. Nacha felt the old dread return, a reminder that their peace was fragile and that every kindness carries its own risks. He knelt beside Mika and whispered, "Stay close today. We may have visitors." And as the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of voices through the cottonwoods, Nacha knew that whatever would happen next would test not just his promise to protect her, but both their wills to survive. The camp grew tense after Nacha found those unfamiliar hoof prints by the river. Mika sensed it right away. She watched his every movement, her shoulders stiff and eyes darting to the trees whenever a branch snapped or a bird called too close. Nacha doubled his caution, scanning the horizon for riders each time he left to check the snares or tend to the horse. He cleaned his rifle in the evening, slow and methodical, glancing at Mika now and then, weighing whether to explain the threat or shield her from more fears. That afternoon, as clouds thickened and wind tugged at the campfire's smoke, Nacha finally spoke. "If strangers come to you, listen to me, understand." His voice was gentle, but there was iron beneath it. Mika nodded, trying to hide the tremble in her hands. "Will they take me back?" she whispered, barely audible. Nacha shook his head. "Not if I can help it, but you must do what I say. You trust me, Mika." It took her a moment, but she answered honestly, "I do." Nacha took that trust like a weight and wore it on his shoulders. They spent the day preparing, hiding extra food in the brush, brushing out their footprints by the riverbank, and tying the horse farther from camp. Mika was quiet, but her questions came at sunset when they sat together and shared a meager meal. "Why do people hate girls like me?" she asked suddenly, voice raw. "Why am I too much trouble?" Nacha poked at the embers, thinking hard before he replied. "Some folks need someone to blame. Sometimes they're scared of anyone different, or anyone who won't bow their head." He paused, eyes catching the last of the daylight. "It's not your fault, Mika. You're not too much. You're just not small enough to fit their rules. That's not a weakness." Mika's brow furrowed, but she listened. But she wanted to believe him, even as old memories crowded her mind, her uncle's curses, the coldness of the women who turned away as she was tied to that tree, the echo of laughter that stung more than any branch. That night, the wind picked up and carried the sound of horses again, closer this time. Not a single rider, but several. Nacha moved quickly, leading Mika to a thicket near the river and motioning for her to hide. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear," he whispered. Mika crawled deep into the brush, hugging her knees, every muscle tense. From her hiding place, she saw flickers of torchlight across the river. Voices carried, rough, impatient, male. "You sure she's still alive out here?" "They said the rancher took her. We find her, we get our pay. Cow's more trouble than she's worth." The words bit into Mika, but she stayed hidden, clutching the knife Nacha had given her just in case. Nacha stood alone at the edge of the camp, facing 3 men on horseback. He recognized one, her uncle's neighbor, a thin-lipped man with a battered hat and a sneer. "Looking for something?" Nacha called, his tone calm but warning. "We're just searching for a lost child," the man replied, trying to sound reasonable. "Heard you might have seen her." Nacha met his eyes. "I found a girl tied to a tree. She's safe now. That's all you need to know." The man's gaze narrowed. "She's Apache, not your concern." Nacha didn't budge. "Anyone left out here, child or not, is my concern." The men muttered, exchanging glances, uncertain. The neighbor finally spat into the dirt. "You keep her. Trouble follows you. Tribe wants her back, says she's cursed." Nacha stared him down. "No one's cursed but the ones who leave a child to die." They traded threats, but Nacha stood firm. Finally, the men turned their horses and rode off, swearing they'd be back. Only when their voices faded into the dark did Nacha go to Mika and help her out of the thicket. She was shaking, but there were no tears, only anger burning hot in her cheeks. "Why did you say I was safe?" she asked, voice hoarse. "You don't even know me." Nacha met her gaze. "I know enough. I know what it means to be thrown away." He crouched, looking her in the eye. "You stay with me as long as you want. No one will tie you up again." That promise was a turning point. Mika clung to it like a lifeline. Over the following days, she started to help more around camp. She fetched water, tended the horse, and even tried fishing with a carved willow pole. Nacha taught her how to mend a tear in her dress and how to set a rabbit snare. They fell into an easy rhythm, not quite family, not quite strangers, but something new. One evening, Nacha found Mika sitting by the river, humming a song he didn't recognize, weaving reeds into a rough bracelet. He sat beside her, quiet, waiting. After a while, she handed him the bracelet, shy but proud. "For you," she said, "so you don't forget me if I ever have to leave." He took it, turning it over in his hands, something warm settling in his chest. But that night, a new sound woke them, the sharp bark of a gunshot, echoing from somewhere downriver. Mika bolted upright, heart pounding. Nacha grabbed his rifle and motioned her to stay low. He peered into the darkness, every sense on edge. Had the men returned? Was there another threat in the wild? He turned to Mika, whispering, "No matter what happens, you don't run. You fight if you have to, but you don't let them take you." Mika nodded, clutching the knife, her breath shaky but steady. In that moment, surrounded by fear and darkness, Nacha realized she was no longer just a scared child needing rescue. She was becoming someone who could stand her ground. And maybe, just maybe, so was he. The morning after the gunshot, the world outside seemed almost too quiet. Every sound sharpened by nerves, Nacha barely slept, keeping watch by the dying fire, rifle across his knees. Mika drifted between restless sleep and the memory of angry voices. Her small fingers curled around the knife even as dawn colored the sky. When she finally opened her eyes, Nacha was already gone from the camp. She sat up, panic fluttering until she spotted him by the riverbank, scanning the far woods. He motioned for her to join him but kept his eyes fixed on the tree line. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but calm. "There's something I need to show you." Together they crept toward a place where the earth had been disturbed. Nacha knelt, brushing away dry leaves. There, clearly imprinted in the mud, were tracks, not just hoof prints this time, but boot prints and small hand lighter marks. Mika's breath caught. "Someone was here," she whispered. Nacha nodded, jaw tight. "More than one, and not just last night. They've been circling this camp for days." He pointed to a broken twig, a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush, red, like the kind Mika's tribe used in their ceremonial sashes. Mika's face paled. "That's my cousin's," she said quietly. "She always wore that color." Nacha frowned. "You think your family's out here?" Mika shook her head, eyes down. "They're not my family. Not anymore. But they might be looking for me, or watching to see if I survived." A cold realization settled between them. Mika wasn't just abandoned, she was being tracked. "Why?" Nacha pressed. Mika hesitated, then blurted out what she'd held back since the night he found her. "There's an old story. In our tribe, if a girl is born wrong, too strong, too loud, too big, they say she brings storms, misfortune. I overheard my uncle telling the others. They think I brought bad luck after last winter's sickness. That's why they left me." Nacha listened, fury rising behind his calm. "That's superstition, Mika, and cruelty." She shrugged, voice brittle. "Doesn't matter. It's what they believe." She looked up at him, fear fighting with defiance. "They'll try to make sure I don't come back." Just then, Nacha heard the distant neigh of his horse, panic in the sound. He motioned Mika to stay put and sprinted toward the camp. What he found twisted his gut. Their supplies scattered, the bedrolls slashed, and the horse's lead cut. Tracks led off into the trees, one set, heavy and wide, the other smaller, quick and scattered. Someone had come into camp, searched through their things, and driven the horse off into the brush. Mika ran to Nacha's side, her eyes wide. "Did they take the horse?" Nacha nodded, scanning for more clues. He found a set of beads strung in the grass, another remnant of Apache craft, unmistakable in color and pattern. "They want you to know it was them," he muttered. Mika wrapped her arms around herself, shivering though the sun was rising. "Now we can't leave quickly," she realized. "We're trapped." But Nacha's mind was already moving. "They want us afraid. But they're not here for a fight. If they wanted you dead, they wouldn't have bothered with warnings or taking the horse. They're trying to force us back, to break our spirit. He knelt, looking Mika in the eyes. We don't let them. We adapt. For the next hours, they worked side by side to salvage what they could. Natcha showed Mika how to set silent alarms, strings of pebbles, branches that would snap and fall if disturbed. He taught her how to move quietly through the trees, leaving almost no trace, how to gather wild roots for food and purify water with fire. Mika listened, learned, and practiced. She was awkward at first, but every lesson filled her with purpose. That night, as they huddled close by a smaller hidden fire, Mika whispered, "I don't want to run forever." Natcha, eyes weary but kind, said, "You won't, but you need to decide. What do you want to do if they come? Hide? Fight? Go back?" Mika was silent, weighing the question. "If I go back, they'll hurt me again. If I stay, they'll keep coming. If I run, maybe I'm still just doing what they want." The conversation hung in the air. Then, Mika reached for the knife again, holding it steady in her lap. "I want to stay with you. I want to learn how to survive, how to be someone they can't break." Natcha nodded. "That's what we do then." But just as they started to settle, a voice echoed through the woods, female, shaking with fear but loud enough to carry, "Mika, come out!" Mika froze. "That's my cousin," she breathed, torn between hope and terror. Natcha tensed, signaling for silence. Another voice joined, harsher, her uncle's. "You have one chance, girl. Come now, and we'll let the cowboy live." It was a trap, a brutal ultimatum. Mika's heart pounded. She looked at Natcha, eyes full of questions. He shook his head, mouth set in a grim line. They won't keep their promise. He readied his rifle, positioning himself between Mika and the voices. "No one takes you, Mika. Not unless you want to go." And just then a branch snapped nearby, someone creeping closer than they realized. Mika had to choose, answer the call and risk everything, or trust Natcha and herself to fight for a life she had only just begun to imagine. The next moment would decide everything, the past or the chance for a future. In the frozen instant that followed the snapping branch, Mika could hear her heartbeat thundering louder than the wind through the pines. Natcha's eyes darted from the shadows to the trees, every muscle taut, his body shielding hers as if by instinct. He raised his hand in a silent gesture, urging her to stay low, quiet, unseen. Mika obeyed, chest pressed to the earth, knife clutched so tight her knuckles ached. The voices outside the ring of light, her cousins pleading, her uncle's threats, grew sharper, closer, the sound of boots crunching through last autumn's leaves. Mika's mind spun with memories of the tribe, of the cold stares, the shame, the nights she'd listened to whispers around the fire, believing she'd never belong. Now as fear pressed in from all sides, she realized what had changed. She didn't want to belong to them anymore. She wanted to belong to herself. Natcha waited, every sense alert, but he could see Mika's panic mounting. He whispered, barely moving his lips, "You're not alone. Remember what I showed you." Mika nodded, focusing on the small details he'd taught her. How to breathe slow and shallow. How to keep still when the world wanted you to run. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the glow of their hidden fire. It was her cousin, Alina, face drawn with worry, eyes flicking from Natcha's rifle to Mika, crouched behind him. "Mika, please," Alina called, her voice trembling. "Uncle says if you come, he'll stop. You won't be punished. Not if you come now." But even as she spoke, Mika saw the doubt in her cousin's eyes, the fear that she, too, might be cast out if she failed. Behind her, Mika caught a glimpse of her uncle's broad shoulders, a shadow shifting just out of the fire's reach. His voice, harsh and commanding, broke the uneasy silence. "This is your last chance, girl. We'll take you," and the cowboy walks away. "Or you both pay for defying us." Natcha stepped forward, rifle low but ready, meeting the uncle's glare without blinking. "She's not your property. You left her to die. She chooses what happens next." The uncle spat on the ground, face twisting with contempt. "She's Apache, she obeys, or she's nothing." Alina flinched, but her eyes pleaded with Mika. "Please," she whispered, "don't make it worse." Mika straightened, shaky but determined. She stepped forward so her uncle and cousin could see her clearly, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking. "I'm not coming with you," she said, voice unsteady but strong. "You can't tell me who I am anymore." Her uncle's face darkened with rage. He took a step forward, hand reaching for the knife at his belt. Natcha tensed, raising the rifle, but Mika held up her own knife, point down, not threatening, just firm. "You left me," she said, words spilling out like a dam breaking. "You called me a curse. I'm alive. I survived because I wanted to, not because you wanted me to die." Alina's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent. For a long moment, the uncle just stared, wrestling with the realization that Mika was no longer afraid of him. Then he hissed, "You'll regret this. No one in these woods will help you. You're nothing without a tribe." Natcha spoke before Mika could answer, his voice calm as stone. "She's not alone, and she's not nothing. Go now, before you lose more than your pride," the uncle snarled, but Alina pulled at his sleeve. "Please, uncle, let's go." She made her choice. For a moment, it seemed he might lunge, fury burning in his eyes. But then, with a final look of disgust, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Alina trailing behind, shoulders hunched. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Mika stood, legs trembling, and watched the place where her family had vanished. She waited for the relief to come, but it didn't. Instead, there was only a strange emptiness, a space where fear used to be. Natcha stepped to her side, lowering his rifle, voice gentle. "You did what you had to do. That takes more courage than most people ever find." Mika nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She was shaking, but it wasn't just from fear. It was the cold shock of freedom. For the first time, she realized her future was hers to shape, not theirs. "What do we do now?" she asked, voice small. Natcha gave her a half-smile. "Now we start over. You've already survived the worst. The rest is just living." As they packed up their few salvaged supplies, Mika looked back once more at the dark forest. She whispered a quiet goodbye, not to her tribe, but to the part of herself that had believed she was unworthy, unwanted, unloved. She wasn't that girl anymore, yet, as they prepared to move on, neither noticed the pair of eyes watching from deep within the pines. A rival, a stranger, or someone else entirely. The world had just gotten bigger, and Mika's journey was only beginning. In the shadows, someone else had been listening, a new threat or an unexpected ally ready to change everything once again. Night fell quickly as Natcha and Mika made their way through the woods, each step muffled by the pine needles carpeting the ground. The air felt different now, heavier, charged with possibility, but also with a vague, prickling tension Mika couldn't quite shake. She walked beside Natcha in silence, heart pounding from the confrontation, replaying every word, every trembling moment when she'd found her voice at last. But freedom, she realized, was not just release. It was uncertainty, and a different kind of danger waited in the spaces beyond what she had always known. After an hour of steady walking, Natcha slowed his pace and motioned Mika to crouch beside him in the darkness. "We can't travel the main trail tonight," he murmured. "Someone could be following. We'll cut through the ravine and make camp by the creek. It's colder but safer." Mika nodded, trusting him without question now. The taste of independence was still strange, like biting into an unfamiliar fruit, sharp, exhilarating, and tinged with risk. They moved in silence, their breath turning to mist in the cold. When they finally reached the narrow stream, Natcha knelt to fill a battered canteen, eyes alert to every sound. Mika's own senses had sharpened in the days since her rescue. Every snapping twig, every flutter of a bird's wings, every sigh of wind set her on edge. But it wasn't just fear, it was awakening. As Natcha set up their small camp, Mika gathered sticks for the fire. She tried to ignore the ache in her arms, the rawness on her wrists where rope had chafed. While she worked, her thoughts drifted to Alina. Was her cousin safe? Had her uncle already twisted the story to make Mika out as a traitor, a danger to the tribe? She shook her head. It didn't matter anymore. Or did it? Once the fire was lit, Natcha sat across from her, tossing dried venison into a pan. The flames danced in his eyes, turning the lines of worry on his face into deep shadows. "You did well tonight," he said. "But you need to understand, being free doesn't mean you're safe. Out here, everyone is watching. And not all are as forgiving as I am." Mika studied his face, searching for meaning. "Do you think they'll come back?" Natcha shrugged. "Your uncle, maybe. But there are others. This land is full of desperate people, settlers, bandits, outcasts. And there's more. Sometimes, the greatest threats don't come from men with weapons, but from hunger, storms, and the cold." His gaze softened. "You need to be strong in more ways than one." Mika felt a flicker of doubt. She was tired, her body sore, her spirit raw. But she remembered the moment she'd faced her uncle, the way she'd stood her ground. "I want to learn," she whispered, voice fierce despite the weariness. "I want to survive." Natcha nodded, approval in his eyes. "You will. Tomorrow, we'll start with tracking. If someone's on our trail, we'll know by dawn." He broke off a piece of bread and handed it to her. "Eat. You need your strength." They ate in silence, the simple meal tasting better than anything Mika could remember. As she chewed, her mind wandered to the eyes she'd felt in the darkness earlier. The sense of being watched hadn't faded with the fire's light. When Natcha stepped away to check their perimeter, Mika caught movement at the edge of the firelight. She froze, heart hammering, knife trembling in her grip. From the shadows stepped a figure, small, hunched, draped in a tattered blanket. A girl, younger than Mika by a few years, with tangled hair and wide, terrified eyes. She hesitated, then stumbled forward, hands up in surrender. "Please," she gasped, voice hoarse, "don't send me back." Natcha returned in an instant, moving between Mika and the newcomer, his stance defensive but measured. "Who are you?" he asked, voice steady. The girl fell to her knees, shivering uncontrollably. "My name is Nina," she whispered. "They left me, too. I followed you. Please, I can help. I know the trails. Just don't let them find me." Mika's heart twisted with recognition. In Nina's haunted expression, she saw the girl she'd been only days before. Alone, desperate, clinging to hope where none should exist. "We're not sending you away," Mika said softly. Natcha hesitated, then lowered his guard. Nina crawled closer to the fire, warming her trembling hands. "There are more of us," she murmured. "Girls who were left behind. Some are hiding. Some didn't make it." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "They'll never stop looking for us, not as long as they think they own us." A cold chill ran down Mika's spine, but now she understood. Her fight wasn't over. It had only just begun, and she wasn't the only one who needed saving. From somewhere deeper in the forest, a distant howl split the night. Animal or man, friend or foe, no one could say. But for Mika, Natcha, and Nina, the journey ahead had become more dangerous and more necessary than ever before. The night pressed down on the trio, thick with unease. Mika barely slept, mind haunted by Nina's words. "There are more of us. They'll never stop looking." When she finally drifted into uneasy dreams, she saw herself tied to that tree again. But now there were other girls beside her, each bound, each silent, their eyes begging for help. She woke just before dawn, sweat beading her brow despite the chill, and for a moment couldn't remember where she was. Then she heard the slow, steady breath of Nina asleep at her side, and Natcha's quiet movement just beyond the circle of dying firelight. She rose and joined Natcha at the creek, watching him check the mud for tracks. He glanced at her, noting the shadows under her eyes. "Did you sleep?" he asked. Mika shook her head. "Not much." She hesitated, unsure if she should admit her fear. "I keep thinking of all the others, if they're still out there, if we can do anything." Natcha's jaw tightened, a sign of his own worry. "You can't save everyone, Mika. Out here, sometimes the best you can do is survive and not lose yourself." He knelt to study a faint depression in the earth. "But you're right to care. It's what keeps you different from the men who left you to die." He paused, gaze sharpening. "Someone's been here, 2 sets of tracks, one light, one heavy, both coming from the east." Mika's pulse raced. "Are they following us?" Natcha stood, his eyes scanning the trees. "Maybe." Or maybe they're hunting something else, but we'll move before the sun's up. He glanced back at the camp. Wake Nina. Tell her to be ready. No talking, no fire. Mika hurried back to where Nina slept, kneeling and shaking her gently. The younger girl jerked awake, fear flooding her face until she saw Mika's reassuring eyes. We need to go, Mika whispered. Someone's close. Nina didn't protest. She simply nodded and gathered her few belongings, wrapping herself tighter in the ragged blanket. They moved in single file through the forest. Mika in the middle, Nacha leading, Nina at the rear. The woods felt alive with possibility and threat, every snapping branch and bird call a warning. Mika forced herself to focus on Nacha's lessons, how to walk softly, how to read the light between the trees, how to listen for what didn't belong. After an hour, Nacha signaled a halt beneath a fallen log bridging a shallow gully. He crouched beside Mika, keeping his voice low. We need to talk about what comes next, he said. I was heading for my cousin's camp. She's Apache like me, and she's helped girls before. But if we're being tracked, that puts her in danger too. Mika's mind spun. So what do? We can't keep running forever. Nacha studied her, searching her face for the strength he hoped was there. That's the choice, he said. Risk leading trouble to someone who can help, or keep moving alone and hope we're faster. Nina listened, hugging her knees, eyes wide with dread. If we go alone, we'll never find the others, she said softly. But if we bring them danger, she bit her lip, the decision tearing at her. Mika weighed the options. She remembered the cruelty of her uncle's eyes, the betrayal of her own tribe, and the hopelessness of being tied and left to die. But she also remembered Alina, her cousin's hand slipping hers a scrap of food in the dark, her whispered promise, "Don't give up. Someone will come for you." She turned to Nacha. What would you do if it were your sister? The question caught him off guard. He closed his eyes for a long moment, remembering. My sister's gone, he said quietly. She ran from the same kind of men who tied you up. I still wonder if I did enough, if I could have protected her. He shook his head. We take the risk. We go to my cousin. It's not just about us anymore. Relief flickered in Nina's face. Mika nodded, decision solid in her heart. Then we go together. And if trouble follows, we face it as a group. They moved fast through the morning, nerves stretched tight as wire. When they reached the edge of the valley, Nacha knelt again, scanning the horizon. Smoke rose in the distance, a signal, a warning, or just someone's cooking fire. He weighed the risks, then motioned for the girls to crouch low and wait. Mika used the moment to talk quietly to Nina, her own fear easing as she tried to comfort the younger girl. How did you get away? Mika asked. Nina's eyes filled with pain. I didn't. They forgot about me after the big storm. I just ran when I heard someone searching for me, hid in the hollow logs until I saw you and Nacha. I thought maybe you'd let me stay. Mika reached for her hand. You're safe with us, for as long as I can help it. Nacha watched them, the gravity of leadership settling onto his shoulders. He didn't say it aloud, but in that moment he realized something had changed. This wasn't just a rescue or an escape. They were becoming something more, a patchwork family, forged by need and choice, bound by the simple refusal to give up on each other. As they moved again, a single crow called from the treetops. Mika felt its cry echo in her chest, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she still might find. She squared her shoulders, ready for whatever came next. Just as they reached the creek bed where Nacha's cousin was supposed to meet them, a figure emerged from the trees, not who they expected, but someone who knew Mika's name, and was not alone. The woods seemed to hold their breath as the stranger stepped into view. Mika's heart lurched. She recognized the woman instantly. It was Maeve, an old friend of her mother's, a figure she'd last seen years ago on the edge of the winter camp. Maeve's braids were streaked with gray, but her posture was tall and her eyes piercing, wary, studied Mika with a mixture of disbelief and concern. Behind Maeve, two men materialized from the undergrowth, one lean and quick-eyed, the other younger, face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. They carried no rifles in sight, but their hands never drifted far from the knives at their belts. Natcha's hand tightened around his own knife, and Mika gently stepped in front of Nina. Maeve broke the tension with a low voice. "You're alive." For a moment, Mika couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the memory of her mother's laughter, the taste of cornbread by firelight, the hope she'd once clung to before everything changed. She found her voice. "We need help. We—" Her words faltered, uncertain if this reunion was truly safe. Maeve's gaze flicked to Natcha, then to Nina. "You brought others." It wasn't a question, just an observation. Mika nodded. "We're not running from the law, just from people who think they can own us." The men behind Maeve exchanged glances. Maeve finally nodded once. "Come, quickly. If you're being followed, we can't stay here." They hurried along a hidden trail, Maeve leading the way with sure steps. The woods felt different now, denser, full of secrets. Nina clung to Mika's side, whispering, "Is she safe?" Mika squeezed her hand. "I think so. She knew my mother. She used to teach us stories." As they reached a secluded hollow, Maeve signaled for silence. She led them behind a curtain of fallen branches to a small dugout beneath the roots of a massive pine. There, out of sight, she turned to Mika, her face softening. "I thought you'd been taken west. When I heard rumors about a girl left for dead, I didn't believe it was you." Mika's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I'm here now. But it's not just me. They're after anyone they think is weak. Girls, boys, doesn't matter." Maeve's jaw clenched. "I know. We've lost too many. That's why we help who we can." She gestured to the men, introducing them in a whisper. "This is Luca. He's got family hiding farther north. The boy is Eben, barely more than a child, but he knows these woods better than most men twice his age." Natcha relaxed a little, but didn't let his guard down. "How long can we stay?" Maeve shrugged, her eyes scanning the woods. "A night, maybe two, then we move. If you're being hunted, it won't be long before they find this place." She turned to Mika. "You need to decide, hide or keep running. There are other camps, but every journey's a risk." As the sun faded, Maeve lit a tiny fire, hidden from sight but enough to warm their hands. Food was sparse. A strip of dried venison, a handful of beans, stale bread. But it was more than Mika had dared hope for just a day ago. She watched Nina eat in silence, face pinched by exhaustion, and felt a swell of responsibility she'd never known before. That night, as wind rustled the pine boughs above, the group huddled together, each lost in private worries. Natcha sat by the entrance, listening for footsteps, his eyes never closing. Mika leaned close to Maeve, needing to ask the question that haunted her since waking on that tree. "Why did my own people do this?" Maeve's face darkened. "Fear, shame. Sometimes cruelty grows in silence, Mika. You were an easy target. But you're not alone anymore." She squeezed Mika's hand. "None of us are." A distant crack echoed through the trees. Natcha was instantly alert, Eben sliding a knife from his boot. For long minutes, the group held their breath, until finally, a fox darted into the clearing and vanished again. Relief flooded the hollow, but the tension never left. Later, Mika couldn't sleep. She lay awake, thinking of her tribe, those who betrayed her, those who looked away, and those who might still be suffering. She thought of Alina, her cousin, whose fate was unknown, of the other girls, lost and alone, hoping for someone to find them. She made a silent promise to herself. "If I survive this, I'll go back for them. I'll never let anyone else be left to die." Just before dawn, Maeve woke her. "Get ready. We move before the sun." As Mika roused Nina, she heard quiet voices, Luca and Natcha, debating which trail was safest, whether to risk the river crossing or circle back toward the hills. Every decision felt heavy, every option dangerous. But when they stepped out into the cold grey of morning, Mika felt something new burning inside her. Not just fear, but a quiet courage, a determination to carve a place in the world for herself and the others who'd been thrown away. As they made their way toward the river, distant shouts echoed through the trees. Someone had found their old camp. The hunters were close, and this time they weren't alone. Dawn spilled a bleak silver over the forest as Mika, Nacha, Nina, Maeve, Luca, and Iban hurried along a narrow, half-frozen creek bed. Every footfall was deliberate, their breaths muffled under the hush of pine needles and distant threat. Behind them, the echoes of shouted orders and barking dogs grew faint but never disappeared, like the memory of pain that never truly faded. Luca led the way now, his posture tense, head cocked for any unnatural sound. Iban moved ahead, light as a wisp, checking the ground for traps or fresh tracks. Nacha flanked the group, constantly glancing back, hand ready at his side. Maeve walked with Nina between herself and Mika, a subtle act of protection that did not go unnoticed. Even in exhaustion, Mika felt a strange surge of pride. They were no longer just victims, no longer merely hunted. They were a unit, bound by necessity, but slowly learning to trust. The morning was a test of will. The river crossing came sooner than expected, a swift, icy ribbon threaded with broken branches and slabs of old ice. Luca hesitated. It's risky, but if they have dogs, our scent'll be gone in the water. This is our only chance. Mika looked down at Nina, her lips blue, her feet swollen and red. Maeve knelt, wrapping a strip of cloth around the girl's feet, her movements gentle. "Stay close to me," she whispered, and Nina nodded, teeth chattering but eyes steady. Crossing was agony. The water bit hard, stealing breath and strength, but no one cried out. On the far bank, Iban scrambled to pull Nina to safety, and Nacha hoisted Mika by the arm. When they finally staggered up the muddy slope, they collapsed in a shivering pile among the reeds. The old wounds on Mika's wrists throbbed. She pressed her palms to the earth, grounding herself. "Keep moving," Luca urged, voice hoarse. "If we stop now, we freeze." Hours passed in slow progress. Branches scraped faces, mud sucked at boots, hunger gnawed. But with every hardship, the group found ways to share the burden. When Nina faltered, Mika carried her piggyback for half a mile, refusing to let the girl give up. When Mika's legs buckled, Nacha handed her the last scrap of jerky from his pocket. Even Eben, silent and stoic, slipped his only pair of mittens over Nina's shaking hands. By midday, they reached a narrow ravine, steep, rocky, hidden from all but the sharpest eyes. Maeve signaled a halt. "We'll rest here, just an hour. It's too exposed to stay, but I know a safer camp north if we can make it before dark." She pressed her palm to Mika's cheek, checking for fever. "Are you stronger than they told you?" she murmured, her voice carrying both approval and worry. In the quiet, the group huddled close, their silence comfortable now. Mika glanced at Nacha, who finally allowed himself to slump against a fallen log. She realized she barely knew his story, why he'd risked everything for her, why he'd left behind his own home for a girl marked by her tribe as unworthy. He caught her gaze, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Didn't think you'd last past the first night," he said quietly. "Guess I was wrong." Mika tried to smile back. "I didn't think anyone would help me. Guess I was wrong too." Maeve watched the exchange with shrewd eyes. We all survive for different reasons. Some run, some fight, some just refuse to disappear. Her words hung in the air, heavy and true. Iban, rarely speaking, added in a quiet tone, "They always say we're weak, girls, orphans, outcasts. But we're still here." As they rested, Nina curled up against Mika, finally sleeping. Luca sharpened his knife, keeping watch at the ravine's edge. Maeve began quietly sharing her plan. "Tonight, we reach the old railroad siding. There's a boxcar left open. We hide there. In a day or two, I'll send word to a friend at the reservation. She knows how to get people out, if you choose." Nacha frowned. "And if the cowboys find us first?" Maeve's lips tightened. "Then we stand together." Suddenly, Eben stiffened. From the shadows above, a stone clattered down. The group froze. Mika's heart raced. Maeve held a finger to her lips. For a long minute, there was only the sound of their breath and the rustle of wind. Then a fox darted through the brush and vanished. False alarm. But the fear lingered. Later, as dusk fell, Mika took a moment to speak to Maeve in private. "If we get out, What happens to the others, girls like me left behind? Maeve's eyes softened. You help them if you can. You tell their stories. That's how you break the silence. Mika nodded, a resolve settling in her chest. She wouldn't just survive. She'd make sure no one else was abandoned the way she was. As darkness wrapped the ravine, they packed up and slipped north, toward the promise of the boxcar and the faint hope of freedom. But as they crested the last ridge, the distant howl of a dog split the night. The pursuers had crossed the river, and their time was running out. The group was less than a mile from safety when lantern lights flickered through the trees behind them, closer than they'd feared. Someone had betrayed their path. Night closed in thick and absolute, pressing down on the narrow track as the group hurried along, breath misting in the sharp air. The world had shrunk to the crunch of their boots, the sting of cold, and behind them, the unmistakable glimmer of lanterns bobbing among the trees. Mika's heart thudded in her chest. Every instinct screamed to run, but every lesson of the last days whispered, "Think, don't panic." The others looked to her now, Nina clinging to her hand, Maeve scanning the darkness, Luca and Natcha tense and ready. Eben, ever watchful, whispered, "They're closer than we thought. 2, maybe 3 men. I saw their hats." "We have to split," Maeve said quietly, voice urgent. "If they catch all of us, it's over. I'll lead them away. Natcha, Luca, take Nina north. Keep her moving, no matter what. Mika, you and Eben cut east. There's an old stream bed, follow it. I'll double back if I can." Her plan was quick, practiced. She'd done this before. Mika hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear. But Nina's terrified eyes made the choice for her. She hugged the girl tight, whispered, "You're brave, I'll find you," and pressed Nina into Natcha's arms. Mika and Eben darted into the darkness, ducking under low branches and dodging brush. Eben's hand found hers, steady and small, but certain. "Keep low," he breathed, "and quiet." The ground sloped down, slick with ice and roots, but Mika pressed on, senses sharpened by desperation. The lanterns veered after Maeve, their shouts echoing, but the danger hadn't passed. Mika could feel it, a presence stalking the forest, calculating. Ahead, the stream bed appeared, a ribbon of moonlit stones, shallow but treacherous. Iban slipped in first, helping Mika down. They crouched, breathless, listening for pursuit. Only the wind, rattling leaves. Iban squeezed her hand. "They'll look for footprints. Stay on the rocks as much as you can." They edged along, barely daring to breathe. Behind them, a single voice rang out, angry, guttural. "Fan out! I want the girl alive!" Boots crashed through the underbrush. Mika's mind raced. Why her? Why so much hatred, so much effort to drag her back? She shivered, not from cold, but from the old ache of being unwanted, used as an example. Not this time. She gripped the knife Natcha had pressed into her hand back at the ravine. This time, she was not powerless. The chase splintered through the woods. Once, a beam of lantern light swung over their heads, so close Mika nearly cried out. Eban pressed her into the mud, both of them motionless as the light paused, then swept away. After what felt like ages, the noise moved north, toward the others. Still, they didn't dare move for long minutes, sweat chilling on their skin. At last, when all seemed quiet, Eben tugged Mika forward. "We have to keep going." He led her up a faint deer trail, past stunted pines and fallen logs. The world narrowed to their boots and the silence between heartbeats. Every so often, Eban would stop, listening with his whole body, before guiding Mika onward. Once he pointed out a feather snagged on a branch, Maeve's sign they were still ahead. Meanwhile, Natcha and Luca struggled through the brush, Nina muffling sobs against Luca's shoulder. The 2 men moved quickly, risking open ground when they heard the pursuit shift. "This way," Natcha hissed, ducking under a fence and out onto a field slick with frost. In the distance, the shadow of the boxcar loomed, hope, if they could reach it. Behind them, dogs barked, and a gunshot cracked the air. Back in the woods, Mika and Eban stumbled to a halt. Someone was ahead, a shadow in the moonlight, standing utterly still. Mika's heart stuttered. Then a voice. "Mika." It was Maeve, blood running from a cut on her forehead but eyes sharp. "They're splitting up. 2 men are searching the creek. We have maybe 15 minutes to get to the tracks." No time to rest. They scrambled forward, adrenaline burning away fatigue. At the edge of the forest, the land opened suddenly, a wide clearing, and beyond, the dark, hulking shape of the old railroad boxcar. Nacha and Luca had reached it first. Mika's relief was so sharp it hurt. "Inside, quick!" Luca whispered, ushering them all in. They piled into the boxcar, slamming the heavy door behind them and pulling an old tarp over the entrance. Breathless, they collapsed together, hands clasped, fear and relief mixing in the air. In the darkness, they waited, counting footsteps, every sound an enemy. Outside, the dogs drew closer, their barking wild. One set of boots approached, then paused. Silence. A flashlight shone across the door, wavering, then moved on. Inside, Mika pressed Nina's hand to her chest, her own heart racing. "We're not caught," she whispered. "Not yet." The others sat in a tense circle, exhausted, battered, but unbroken. Even in the darkness, Mika could feel the shift. They were no longer just running. They had reached the edge of the world that wanted to destroy them. All that remained was to see if they could claim a place in it. A metallic clank echoed from the far end of the boxcar. Someone or something was already inside, waiting in the shadows. A metallic clank echoed from the far end of the boxcar, sending a ripple of fear through the huddled group. Mika stiffened, pulling Nina closer as Eben and Maeve exchanged worried glances. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. Then a low, raspy cough broke the silence. A human sound, weary but not threatening. From the shadows, an old man emerged. His beard was streaked with grey, his face weathered by years and sorrow. He carried no weapon, just a battered lantern and a wary gaze. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Maeve edged forward, hands open, showing she held nothing dangerous. "We're just passing through. We mean no harm." The man eyed them, lantern trembling slightly in his grip. "You've brought trouble with you." Mika nodded, unable to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "We had no choice. Please, we just need to rest." The man's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he looked over the small group, especially the children, caked with mud and fear, clinging to each other for warmth. He sighed, setting the lantern down with a gentle thud. "This car's not safe for long. The sheriff's men come by when the dogs start barking. You'll need to move before sunrise." "Is there anywhere we can go?" Eben asked, his tone low but urgent. The man considered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe there's a ravine east of here, deep and tangled, too rough for horses, too tight for more than a few men to enter at once. If you make it there before dawn, they'll never find you." He hesitated. "But it's not a place for children." Maeve looked at Mika, then the rest. "We don't have a choice. Can you show us the way?" The man shook his head. "I'll draw you a map." He rummaged in his pack, tearing a scrap of brown paper and quickly sketching a route. "Go through the pines, past the fallen log, down the slope until you see blackberry brambles. Follow them to the stream. Stay off the main trail." He pressed the map into Mika's hands, squeezing her fingers with surprising strength. "Don't trust anyone. They want someone to blame for what happened in town, and strangers make easy targets." Mika thanked him, her voice barely a whisper. As the old man vanished into the night, the children pressed closer together, fear and hope tangled in their hearts. Luca peered outside, then motioned for everyone to follow. "We should go. Now." They slipped from the boxcar into the icy darkness, moving as one, silent, breath visible in pale ribbons, feet numb with cold. Mika led the way, holding the map tight. Every noise felt amplified. The hoot of an owl, the distant barking of dogs, the wind sighing through pine needles. As they moved, the woods seemed to close around them, branches clawing at their clothes, roots threatening to trip their steps. Mika fought back panic. She kept her mind focused on each landmark, the fallen log, the brambles, the sound of water. Behind her, Eban counted the group's breaths in a steady rhythm, calming Nina each time she stumbled. Suddenly, the world exploded into noise. Shouts, the crack of a branch, a wild dog bursting from the underbrush. The group froze, but Maeve reacted first, hurling a stone at the animal. The dog yelped and bolted, but the damage was done. The pursuers heard them. Lanterns glimmered through the trees, voices growing louder. There, they're there. Spread out. Mika's heart hammered in her chest. Run! She hissed, grabbing Nina and sprinting through the brambles. The others followed, scattering as footsteps crashed behind them. Mika's lungs burned, her arms aching as she dragged Nina over a fallen branch. The stream was ahead. She could hear the rush of water. She pushed the girl forward. Cross! Go! As they scrambled across the slippery stones, a man's voice called, Stop! A shot rang out. Mika ducked instinctively, the bullet slicing through the night. Maeve shoved Eban across the stream, then spun to face the pursuers, knife in hand. Two men skidded to a halt at the water's edge. We don't want to hurt you, girl, one shouted. Just the wild one. Maeve laughed, the sound sharp as a blade. You'll have to go through me first. A tense standoff followed, neither side moving, the stream roaring between them. In that instant, Mika realized something had shifted. She was no longer the helpless girl the town tried to break. She was here, alive, with people who would fight for her, and who she'd fight for in return. Luca found a heavy branch, brandishing it as a club. Nacha hissed for the children to keep low, shielding Nina with her body. Mika felt herself stand taller. Leave us alone, she shouted, her voice shaking but fierce. The men hesitated, uncertain. Then, from the darkness, the old man's voice rose. They're gone east. I saw them, over the ridge. A moment's confusion. Enough. The pursuers scattered, chasing ghosts through the pines. In the sudden silence, Mika felt the world tilt on its axis. Their pursuers would regroup, but for now, they were safe. Mika sank to her knees, breathing hard, as the first rays of dawn crept through the trees. Behind her, the others watched in silence, exhausted, battered, but free. In the quiet, Mika looked at her hands and realized the only thing more terrifying than being hunted was having to choose at last who she wanted to become. The forest was eerily still as Mika's ragged breaths faded into the morning light. The group gathered by the stream, the icy water lapping over bruised ankles, their bodies trembling more from adrenaline than cold. No one spoke for a long moment. It was as if, with the danger behind them for now, they could finally feel the ache of every wound, every fear that had haunted them since the moment they first locked eyes on that girl tied to the tree. Luca was the first to break the silence. He crouched beside Nina, gently brushing her tangled hair from her face. We made it, he whispered, but his voice sounded uncertain, as if still waiting for the next threat to burst through the brush. Eban let his arms fall to his sides, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. He glanced at Mika, searching her face for direction. What do we do now? Mika looked down at her hands, scratched and dirty but free. The map the old man had given her was torn, one corner missing, but the path was clear now. The ravine loomed just ahead, tangled with vines and shadows, but safe, for the moment, from the world that had tried so hard to erase them. We keep moving, she said finally. We find shelter. We rest. Her voice, once timid and unsure, rang with a new steadiness. No one here gets left behind. Nacha nodded, cradling Nina in her lap. There's a cave by the water, she murmured. My father told stories of it. It's deep and dry. We could hide there until the searching stops. The group moved slowly, helping each other across slick stones and fallen logs. The cave, when they found it, was small but warm, the mouth hidden by a curtain of tangled roots. Inside, they built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke from giving them away. As the flames grew, Mika watched the faces around her, their fear slowly softening into something like hope. For the first time, Nina fell asleep without whimpering, curled up between Nacha and Mika, her hands clutching a strip of blanket. Luca dozed at the mouth of the cave, his body wedged protectively in the gap. Eban and Maeve sat together, whispering quietly, their shoulders touching, as if drawing comfort from each other's presence. Mika stayed awake the longest, staring into the embers. The events of the past days played in her mind, the terror of waking tied to a tree, the panic of being hunted, the moment she chose to run rather than surrender. She saw herself through the eyes of the others, no longer just a wild girl, but a leader, a survivor. The realization was as strange as it was empowering. In a world that called her too wild to save, she'd found a family willing to risk everything for her freedom. Morning crept into midday, and then afternoon. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but no one complained. Mika and Maeve ventured out together, careful and quiet, gathering roots and berries, and with luck, catching a small rabbit in an old snare left near the ravine. They roasted it over the fire, the meat stringy but enough. It tasted of victory. As days passed, the sounds of search parties faded. Once, Mika heard distant voices, dogs barking and men cursing, but they never drew close. The old man's directions had been true. No one found them. Little by little, the wounds on Mika's wrists and ankles healed. The children began to laugh again, quietly at first and then with more confidence. Even Eban, always so watchful, allowed himself to relax, spending long hours carving small toys from wood to amuse Nina. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold behind the trees, Maeve turned to Mika. "You saved us, you know," she said softly. "You gave us a reason to keep running." Mika shook her head. "We saved each other." She met Maeve's gaze, the bond between them silent but strong. "We all chose to fight." That night, as they sat around the fading fire, Mika found herself thinking about the old life she'd lost and the new one she'd built, not by accident, but by stubborn, desperate choice. The world that had tried to break her had failed. She wasn't just the girl tied to the tree anymore. She was proof that survival meant more than breathing. It meant belonging and loving and refusing to be defined by the cruelty of others. Weeks turned into months. By the time the first wildflowers bloomed along the banks of the ravine, the group had become a family in truth. The story of the wild girl found by the Apache spread in whispers, no longer as a warning, but as a legend of resilience. Locals, hearing rumors of the cave and the children who had vanished, sometimes left food by the river, offerings to the spirits, or perhaps to the memory of the girl who refused to die quietly. Years later, Mika would return to the spot where she was once tied, no longer afraid but grateful for the moment that changed everything. She would find others like her, lost and discarded, and teach them to stand. She would remember the kindness of strangers, the courage of friends, and the wild, relentless will that carried her from terror to freedom. If this story moved you, remember, sometimes the wildest hearts are the ones who teach us how to survive. Share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more true-hearted stories, and never forget, what others see as broken may be the strongest part of you. See you in the next video.